Today we have the pleasure of hearing from Kristin Case. Kristin Case is a consultant in the field of quality management systems who specializes in aerospace and small businesses. She established Case Consult in Tulsa in 2001 and serves clients from coast to coast. She's a professional engineer licensed in Oklahoma. She volunteered 5 years for the Baldrige Performance Excellence Program after serving 5 years for the Oklahoma Quality Award Foundation. Kristin has been a member of ASQ for almost 25 years and has held a variety of local, regional, and national positions. She was recently made a full member of the International Academy for Quality. She holds Exemplar's Global Quality Management System Principles Auditor certification. Her education includes degrees in industrial engineering, applied mathematics, and an MBA. With that said, I would hand off the presentation to Kristin Case. Welcome.
Thank you, Jair. Welcome to this webinar on management system management. When I was asked to present a webinar to ASQ Inspection and Quality Management Divisions, I struggled to think of a topic that would have appeal across such a base of wide-ranging interests. So I've tried to create a brief, broad-based webinar where hopefully attendees will have at least one takeaway. I chose management system management because so many people work within or with an organization that complies with one or more management systems. I'm assuming, because this is primarily an ASQ audience, that you are most familiar with quality management systems, and I'll be using ISO 9001 for reference because it is the most popular and well-known management system. Most of the ideas and suggestions presented in this webinar could be fairly easily adapted for other management systems. So if ISO 9001 does not apply to your organization, you may still find benefit in the content presented. That said, my first topic, quality manuals, is specific to ISO 9001. Only because in the current version of ISO 9001, a quality manual is no longer required documentation for a fully compliant quality management system. This new flexibility allowed organizations to eliminate, update, or streamline their manuals. In practice, I've witnessed most organizations are simply doing what they've always done. So I'm going to present some suggestions about what should and what shouldn't be in a good manual. Quality professionals bring a wide array of tools to their organizations: cause and effect diagrams, root cause analysis, statistical process tools and techniques, and continual and process tools such as Lean, Six Sigma, Lean Six Sigma, etc. These tools are frequently applied to operations, less frequently applied to support and administrative processes, and in my experience, rarely applied to the documents and processes most closely related to our own sphere of influence or at least interest, management system processes, such as auditing and corrective action. So I will present a few quick tips for improving your internal audit and corrective action processes. The value of a management system is in the results it provides, and I'm not talking about the framed and possibly expired certificate hanging on the wall in a lobby. For organizations who do not have their objectives aligned with the true goals of the business, operating the management system can be ineffective and inefficient. And it may only seem urgent when the external auditor is on his way. And let's face it, it takes a lot of effort to generate 12 months of objective evidence in only 6 weeks. So I will speak to business, organizational, and quality objectives as differentiated from process measures. And lastly, for organizations that find their actual processes are not aligned with their written documentation, I will address some of the frequent causes for that mismanagement. When ISO 9001:2015 was released, the requirement to document a quality manual had been removed. Previous to the 2015 version, quality manuals had only actually had 3 required items total. In fact, the old standard said, and I'm actually quoting this, "The organization shall establish and maintain a quality manual that includes A, the scope of the quality management system, including details of and justifications for any exclusions. B, the documented procedures established for the quality management system or reference to them, and C, a description of the interaction between the processes of the quality management system. So you needed a scope, reference to your procedures, and a description of how your quality management system processes interacted. And yet somehow organizations interpreted this to mean that they should precisely and faithfully copy the verbiage from the standard itself, replacing only a few key words. In the last month alone, I've seen 2 quality manuals that were each over 30 pages. Neither organization had 10 employees. There are some excellent reasons for maintaining a quality manual, and for most organizations, I would recommend that. It can provide good documentation structure. It can present a concise overview of your system. It gives you a location to put your scope, your policy, and objectives. And it can present the sequence and interaction of your processes. And I will not bore you by reading the list of cons, although we will talk about contents here shortly. There's an ISO standard that provides guidelines for quality management system documentation. It hasn't been updated since 2001, and I think I could safely describe it as dated, so I don't recommend using it as a guideline. But I want to present its recommendations on the contents of a quality manual only to demonstrate contrast with what I would currently recommend in 2018. As this publication, which is known as a technical report, was only a guideline, it doesn't use the word shall. It is only making recommendations, so it uses the word should. And this is the list the guideline says that you should have in your manual. And now we can contrast this list with my recommendations for a quality manual. If your manual is concise enough, you do not need a table of contents. I've seen manuals that are anywhere from 2 to 5 pages that include everything I'm going to suggest here. If your manual is only 2 pages, you probably do not need a table of contents. This is actually one of the 2 bullet points on which ISO 10013 and I both agree. Your manual should show evidence of review, approval, and revision. The scope of the quality management system was literally one of only 3 required items that had to be in the manual, and somehow that was left out of ISO 10013. If you're going to have a quality manual, I recommend you describe the scope of your system in it. Also, I would include your quality policy and objectives, including the calculations for how those objectives are measured. As an example, I've easily seen 20 different ways to calculate on-time delivery. So go ahead and describe how your organization will calculate your objectives. But I do draw the line at targets. I would not include targets in the manual. In most organizations, they are frequently changing and better presented elsewhere. I would present a high-level org chart. Nothing fancy, no names, maybe titles for the top row, but just departments below that. The manual is not a great place for a full description of responsibilities and authorities. Those may be better described in procedures, work instructions, position descriptions, statements of accountability, human resources file cabinets, pretty much anywhere but the quality manual. However, there is one caveat. If you are writing one top-tier manual that is going to address an ISO 9001 or industry-specific standard and regulations, and your regulations require you put responsibilities and authorities in the manual, then go ahead and follow your regulations and put those in the manual. References. If you are going to include references in your manual, and here I'm talking about external references, the ones your organization did not write. For example, regulations, national or international standards, or industry specs. Make sure that you actually need to reference them. I read a lot of manuals where they're listed under a list of references, but then the content of the content of the manual never actually refers to those references. And whether you're referencing internal or external references, don't include the revision level. Otherwise, every time one of those references is updated, your manual is no longer current. Arguably, the most important part of the manual is the description of the quality management system. This should be some kind of representation, to use PMI's terminology. It could be a picture, a model, flowchart, swim lane diagram, or any other graphic that helps portray your organization's quality management system. And I believe this is why so many organizations simply parrot the standard. They do not have a conceptual framework for their own system and believe that copying the standard is the safest choice to describe their quality management system. It is not a safe choice, and it is not a good choice. Lastly, ISO 10013 says the manual should include appendices. That always struck me as odd because there is no mention of what the content in those appendices might be. So bottom line, what should be in a quality manual and why? The current ISO 9001 standard requires that the organization document the scope of the system, the quality policy, and the objectives, as well as determine the processes needed for their quality management system and their sequence and interaction. And one good way to prove that you've determined those processes, their sequence and interaction, is to actually document them. I would add a high-level org chart for anyone not familiar with the design of the organization. Lastly, I think it's an exceptional idea to use the manual to provide the framework or structure for lower-tier documentation. Again, back in previous versions of the standard, references to processes were required in the manual. Rather than a table that lists all of your procedures, I suggest simply showing on your quality management system model where the procedures apply. Let me share some examples with you of how organizations reference related procedures to their quality management system model. I've removed a lot of the details, and these are definitely text redacted, but left just enough so you could see that this is a quality management system model for an organization. And then here's a version where they've actually included the applicable procedure number, so if you needed more detail about a process, you would have a reference to go to. Here's another picture of a quality management system model. In this organization, they not only had one or more procedures for each of the core processes, as represented in those columns, but they also had one for the measures and the KPIs, which was the last row, and management review and risk mitigation. And those procedure numbers are now shown in the red font. And one more example. Fairly simple quality management system. And here it is with references to both their procedures and work instructions. So the second thing I wanted to talk about today was internal audit and corrective action improvements. I'm going to quickly present several opportunities for improvement for the processes of auditing and corrective action. And I've categorized them into scheduling and timing, competency, roles, responsibilities, and accountability, and a few counterintuitive opportunities. If you work in an organization where internal audits are always performed to schedule, well, then you should probably actually be giving this webinar. Internal audits are one of the first things to slip when an organization is crunched for resources. I suggest that in setting your annual schedule for performing internal audits, you leave intentional gaps in the schedule that allows for greater flexibility when dealing with unforeseen events. I've known some organizations where the audit program manager schedules even the details of each individual audit instead of leaving it to the audit team and the auditees, and I've never seen any need for that level of micromanagement. Most organizations schedule process-based audits of their organization year after year after year, and that is a good method. However, I would recommend that every few years or so, you pull together your entire team of auditors and perform a system-based audit. similar to how your certification body or a regulatory body might do it. The advantage is that you will gain a perspective rarely seen during the process-by-process audit schedule. And when I teach internal auditing, I remind students that the preparation and planning should take about 50% of the total time allotted for an audit. Performing the audit takes about 25%, and reporting generally takes about 25%. Without a doubt, this rough estimate varies based on auditor competency, experience, the process complexity, and the volume of documentation. But I've seen audit program managers assume that if they give an audit team half a day to perform an audit, that the entire half day will be spent auditing. You must allow time for preparation and reporting if you want to get any value out of the internal audits. And speaking of getting value out of internal audits, internal auditors come from a wide variety of backgrounds with varying levels of education, skills, and experience. A typical 16 or 24-hour internal audit course is a great start for introducing auditors to the standard and practice of auditing, but it doesn't turn attendees into competent auditors any more than a basic motorcycle riding course turns students into competent bikers. An introductory course is designed to impart the knowledge that allows students to begin building their competencies through practice. And that is true both for auditing and riding a motorcycle. One of the best ways to improve auditor competency is to let the auditors prepare their own plans. Pre-made checklists work against you, and anyone with a pencil can do one. I recommend you both give and receive feedback to auditors, partly so they can improve, partly so that you understand what areas they need focus on. Like any other skill, ongoing training is beneficial, and I recommend 15 to 30-minute modules, which could even be held during a lunch hour, on specific focus areas where your auditors need more attention, maybe listening skills, audit prep, understanding the requirements, whatever it is they're asking for. As your audit program experiences turnover, it's a good idea to flowchart or somehow map out the steps of the entire internal audit process, including the scheduling, preparing, performing, and reporting, following up on corrective actions, and then summarizing all of that content for management review. Internal auditors are not often exposed to all of those steps. Get together and do this as a team. There is a great benefit to auditors in understanding their roles within the overall process. Here are some counterintuitive opportunities. If your system is overwhelmed with corrective action requests, and this is pretty common during the initial stages of implementation or during significant change management, you can actually limit the number of corrective actions reported per audit. There is very much a right and a wrong way to do that. The right way to do that is by revising the scope of the audit. So if you were originally given a larger scope, when you reach the trigger number of corrective actions, quit auditing, write up your report to document the subset of the original scope that was actually audited. Many organizations have a policy or procedure that specifies how long corrective actions can be open. 14, 30, or 45 days are fairly common. But not all problems are the same size. I recommend you tailor your due date to A, the scope of the problem, and B, the schedule of whoever is accepting responsibility for action. When possible, have the initiator of who found the problem that needs corrective action be the same individuals who perform the follow-up for the corrective action. Who is more likely to find a problem the second time around? The same person who found it the first time around. When corrective actions are followed up, make sure they are implemented effectively. This may require a two-step closure. There are times when you can quickly determine that corrective action has been implemented, but it takes a while to determine whether or not it was effective. You can use outsiders as internal auditors. They could be subcontracted, traded between divisions, borrowed from other organizations, class attendees, or auditors working toward earning their lead auditor certification. This is an especially good practice for small companies. And if you do decide to outsource some of your audits, I would start with leadership processes, internal audits, and corrective action as those that should first be viewed by an outsider. Just a couple more quick tips. Don't issue corrective action requests. You will get better responses by requesting action. And if your internal audit procedure goes into enough detail on how to address corrective action that procedure is redundant to your corrective action procedure, you might want to go ahead and eliminate those redundancies. ISO 9001 refers to objectives as quality objectives, and I think this does a great disservice to many organizations. In simple or organic or startup or micro businesses, the quality objectives typically are the organizational objectives. And when they're not, the quality objectives are usually a subset of the organizational objectives. But by calling them quality objectives, we tend to limit the thinking as to what objectives actually belong there. It's critical to remember why objectives are so important, but it's simple and it's in the definition of a management system. A system is just a set of interrelated or interacting activities. We call those processes. A management system is just a set of interrelated or interacting activities designed to achieve a set of objectives. So the whole point is to achieve objectives. It is mission critical to get the objectives set right. As a general rule, organizations are in business to achieve financial success. Financial success depends on customers, and not just any customers, but satisfied, engaged, or repeat customers. Customer satisfaction depends on a quality product, or service, or result, or outcome. And quality outputs depend on processes, capabilities, and human and other resources. My recommendation is that your senior leaders consider all of these areas when determining their measurable objectives. And only senior leaders should be engaged in determining those objectives. If they delegate that activity, then they are almost guaranteed to have an ineffective or inefficient management system. When senior leaders ask me as a consultant what I think objectives should be, I never know, but I suggest to them that they envision that this is their new home and that they are out in the middle of nowhere on an island, and that this is the amount of information they are allowed to receive on a regular basis. And we work to figure out what key data points they would most want to know. One last note on objectives. With respect to how data and information is presented to the organization, ideally all objectives will share one time frame. So in this case, it's monthly. In the organization that I drew this from, all of the objectives are presented monthly. Color code all the targets and the actuals across whatever measures are presented. When objectives are presented and every single graph is presented differently, and different colors mean different things, and some are pie charts, and some are bar charts, and some are line charts, it is really difficult to decipher how well the organization is doing. Also, try to make all graphs share a positive direction. In the case of on-time delivery, it's obvious that up is good. However, if my next graph were to show scrap, then down would be good. So when possible, align the direction of good in your metrics. One of the most common mistakes I see in organizations is that organizations write procedures prior to implementing the process. There is a widespread belief that if a procedure is written, then it will be followed. So how should an organization go about documenting their processes and procedures? Once you have determined that a procedure is necessary, and make sure it's necessary, because procedures require a lot of resources to keep them current, properly distributed, ensure obsolete versions are inaccessible, but once you truly determine a procedure is necessary. Get a team involved to map out the process, and I recommend that that team should include the process owner, or the individual who has the greatest stake in the process, someone who routinely does the process, an internal customer of the output of the process, and someone who knows nothing about the process. That person always asks the best questions on the team. Then, using that team, map out the process by determining the key steps first, just the core steps. Only add detail when necessary. Draft the process in some type of representation, like a flowchart, and then before committing those steps to a procedure, do them. Follow the steps you've mapped out. Practice. It's incredibly unlikely that the process is going to work out the way it was originally designed. Walk through it a few times and call the team back together. Talk about what went as expected and what did not. Revamp the process map, test drive it again, and make adjustments. Only when the process is functional should it be formally documented and approved as a procedure. Make sure you have core agreement and provide training upon release and in the event of a revision. Not everyone has great technical writing skills, so just a few tips you might want on actually writing a procedure. When you write the purpose in a procedure, write the purpose of the process, not the purpose of having a procedure. State the scope of the process. Answer what is included and what is excluded, and then stay within the defined scope. The last section that I ever write, which is the third section most people read, is responsibilities and authorities. If you start writing that section before describing the process, then way too much process description gets written into the responsibilities and authorities. It should simply be a summary of who has the responsibilities, and it should be aligned with the content in the rest of the procedure. At a minimum, review procedures annually or during internal audits, which is another reason internal audits should not have pre-made checklists, because that allows auditors to bypass the actual reading of the procedure. I want to thank you guys for your time, and I hope you found some value in this webinar, and I'd like to open it up for questions. If you do not have time to stick around for questions, feel free to contact me. I'm on LinkedIn, or you can reach me through my website. And Jahir, I think I will turn it back over to you here.
Thank you, Kristin. So if anyone has a question, please do enter it in